This is DBrief, brought to you by the Australian Industry Group.
Welcome to DBrief, the podcast that explains industry to policymakers and policy to industry. My name is Louise and Jeff, Head of Industry Development and Policy at the Australian Industry Group, and I'm joined today by my colleague Jeff Wilson, Head of Research and Economics. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Louise.
So this episode is again looking at the Iran crisis. And, members are telling us that this feels bigger than just fuel prices. Since the conflict has escalated, we've gone from just a watching risk to businesses already absorbing costs and disruptions. We've already had one episode on this. We've had a webinar, but now, this is stage 3. And so we're really getting to the detail of what's going on, and we're actually seeing how things are hitting supply chains and what members should be preparing for next. So, Jeff, to kick us off, what has happened since the webinar and our member note went out? What's changed most materially for Australian businesses? Not in theory anymore, but on the ground.
Thanks, Louise. This is a really tricky question because in some senses the answer is not a lot just yet, but in another sense the answer is a lot has changed over the last few weeks, particularly in terms of our learning and our understanding. This crisis has kind of had 2 waves in Australia. The first one, which is when the conflict in the Middle East broke out, we saw a big rise in fuel prices. Everyone experienced that at the CV service stations. But then there's this other thing as that passes through the supply chain with oil to fuels and plastics and other products, there's another one coming. And we're kind of at the moment in between of those 2 waves, if you can think of waves coming. But we're not, and Australian business isn't just sitting still kind of waiting for the next wave to come. And over the last few weeks, we've really learned a lot about how this is broadening out and where we're going to expect to see impacts that's going to be bigger than fuel. We've seen government doing a lot more as well, like a real steady stream of policy announcements from government over the last few weeks, looking at accessing fuel supply, looking at the pricing of fuel, and then starting to look at what's going to happen to other products in the supply chain if we get more shortages occurring over the next couple of weeks into May and June. And we've also done a lot of work talking to business, which we'll talk about in this episode, particularly how businesses are really familiarising themselves with their supply chain, learning where their liabilities might be, and starting to put in practice into place systems that they can be able to be better respond when that next wave hits and we might be having to manage shortages of product or another round of price rises. The story is very different, but the common theme is we're in the middle and now's the time to get ready. And we've really seen all the progress on all of those fronts. So hopefully we can give you all an update on that now. But Louise, my first one back to you is, in Australia, we've called this a fuel crisis, and you'll see that in the newspaper, the fuel crisis, fuel crisis, fuel crisis. A lot of the work we've done engaging with members across the industrial ecosystem, transport, construction, manufacturing, logistics, is that there's a lot, the terms are quite not right because there's more to this iceberg than just the fuel tip. Do you want to tell us about what we've learned from members about where this is going to go?
That's right, Jeff. So when people hear Iran and fuel and they assume it's just about petrol prices, and that's certainly the first wave of discovery people could see, when they turned up to the Bowser, sometimes there was a shortage, and invariably the prices went up. And so it is a distraction to think it's just about petrol, and certainly that's the government response initially. But from members, telling us, as we said, there's supply chain issues of actual products. So, a lot of the Australian economy relies on a petrochemical supply chain that begins in the Middle East, goes through Asia, and then finally comes to us with products on the shelves. And that's certainly a big issue that we're addressing. But before that, before the fuel and before the supply chain, it's just freight and insurance. Insurance was being pulled from products while ships are on the water. Ships can't get through the Strait of Hormuz. There was challenges even just getting through the Red Sea. Ships are being diverted from the region to the rest of the world, and so there's a whole range of issues relating to a glut in one part of the world and scarcity in another. Product was being short shipped, so being dumped sort of in Singapore or Malaysia or somewhere, and then companies being forced to pay for that to come through to Australia. So international freight has certainly been affected. Air freight, of course, has been affected because, we think, if you know someone who's been flying to or from Europe, during this crisis, of course, they've been impacted by the airlines not being able to go through the region. People often forget that under passengers' feet is a whole lot of freight. And that freight itself has been disrupted and having to go through the US and all sorts of things. So a whole range of issues. But, are we thinking about is this as a systemic supply chain shock, Jeff, or what makes this different from a temporary spike or a single sector problem?
Well, we've had temporary shocks in the global oil market and energy markets have been a feature of the world's history, unfortunately. I mean, many listeners will be old enough to remember the 1973 and the 1979 oil crises. Back in Australia, you might acutely remember when we used to ration petrol based on the registration plate number on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. But this one is going to be different. And look, we're not here to give geopolitical analysis and not going to offer you any predictions of when or how the war might end. But some things have already happened that are going to make it unlikely that we're just going to go back to how things were at any political solution to this conflict. A lot of infrastructure in the region's been damaged, particularly one that's important is the Ras Laffan LNG processing facility in Qatar. It supplies 20% of the world's LNG, and it's been bombed. And the Qatari authorities are saying it's going to take years to rebuild that. And given the situation, can they even go in and do that yet? Would they rebuild it the same? Open question. There's also this long lag we're going to see. We've talked about this before, but oil goes into a refinery that might make fuel or plastic or fertilizer. And when you shut down those supply chains, you can't just turn them back on. So even if oil started flowing back like it did in January, there's going to be a long time before we have to restart up that multiple step chain, which here in Australia, we're at the very end of those chains. So it could be a very long time. We'd be looking, even if everything returned to normal tomorrow, which frankly is probably not likely to happen, this will be for the rest of the year that we'll be working through that in Australia. And if it doesn't, possibly into next as well. So this is not something that we should be reading the headlines and seeing, there's been a peace deal or something like that. This is going to be something that Australian industry, economy, I think our whole society is going to have to deal with for quite some time yet. That one gets back to, you mentioned freight and shipping, Louise. Was probably the very leading edge when this started, that suddenly we had these interruptions. And we've seen more, there's been announcements in the last day or two about airline routes into Australia as well from Qantas and some other airlines. But where we are with freight and shipping is, because it has changed, it's gone backwards and forwards a lot over the last month, hasn't it?
That's right. And it's still quite constrained. I mean, the thing with exporters and international traders, we've been trading for centuries, so people are quite flexible and adjusting, but it's really hurting a lot of exports into the region. And let's not forget, we've only just signed our free trade agreement with UAE. There are a lot of shipments that were going in to take advantage of that, and now they've all been disrupted. So, but it's not just international freight, it's also local freight. Members are telling us that they're getting surcharges, emergency surcharges on their bills, weekly fuel levies. Carriers are unable to commit to timelines. There's union action to the Transport Workers Union within the Commission to actually set freight rates, which is extraordinary. That we don't think we're in a controlled economy until we get into the Industrial Relations Commission. So there's a whole range of issues that are just creating a lot of uncertainty. And Jeff, before we get into the break, members have told us that the biggest issue isn't actually cost. It's not knowing where the goods will arrive at all or when, what the price will be. So what extent do you think this uncertainty will cause problems? And is it just about price or availability, or is it both that's causing the problem?
This one's really important. And I think when we talk about this, we kind of lose sense of that. The price and supply issues, they're both important, but they're working on kind of different ways and different timelines. So what we saw kind of during March was when the crisis first broke out, there was a price rise. We all saw that at the service station, but we've also, with liaison with members, seen that across a lot of affected products like we've talked about, plastics, industrial, petrochemicals, fertilizers. A lot of members saying, prices were going up, getting new invoices or quotes 20, 30, 40% higher because of this. At this point, we haven't had these shortages in Australia yet. There's still, because of the way that supply chain, depending on the product, 6 to 12 weeks, that's still coming down. So that first wave was a price wave so far, and that's what we're feeling. But there is this kind of availability wave. We talked about this before, but it was this question around force majeure letters, which is which a business is kind of legally required to send if they think they might not be able to deliver a contract. They say, look, we've got this supply issue, we might not be able to deliver on time. And that's led to this knock-on wave of uncertainty. So for businesses that say that they might be importing a feedstock from a refinery in Asia, that can't get the raw material out to the Middle East. The refinery says, we're not sure we can deliver in July the volume we've committed to. That might be 70% you'll get or 0% you'll get, you don't know. But the level of uncertainty that causes in an Australian business, that we don't know when supply is coming in over the next couple of weeks or months, what do we do with our investment, what do we do with our plant, what do we do with our workforce, has led to a huge range of kind of anticipating that next wave. The product is, it depends what product we're talking on. We'll talk about a few of them in detail later. So it could be weeks, 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending on what you're talking about. But for everyone, there's now this great uncertainty effect of we don't know what the next couple of months or the rest of this year is going to look like. We're not sure how to commit to investment. We're not sure how to place our own orders. And that's kind of knocked on. So what we've really got at the moment is a first price thing, a big uncertainty thing already. And then we're looking ahead and planning for the availability issues that, depending on the product, may or may not come up in the next couple of weeks.
Well, what we might do is take a break now, Jeff, and then when we come back, I'll go through what our members are telling us, we should be most worried about right now.
You're listening to the DBrief podcast, brought to you by the Australian Industry Group. To find out more about how Australian Industry Group can help your business, visit australianindustry.com.au.
Hi, and welcome back to DBrief, where we're discussing the next wave of how the global energy crisis is unfolding and impacting on Australia. Louise and I have just had a conversation about where Australia finds itself in terms of the waves of this crisis that's coming through. And what we now want to talk about is kind of some of the things that we've seen in products. We've spent the last few weeks at the Australian Industry Group working really closely with members to understand the texture of the crisis that we're having and how it's going to affect different parts of the economy and industrial ecosystem in different ways. We've collected, Louise, a huge amount of feedback from different branches of industry, deep and broad. Where are we kind of like, where are we getting to in terms of the products that are currently being affected, where we might see that coming, and what's the impact going to be on the industry over the next few weeks?
Well, Jeff, as many people know, my degree's in Arabic language and culture, which has been useful. I know we're not talking about the geostrategic elements, but that's certainly useful when I'm thinking about it. I only did chemistry up to year 11, but I can tell you that this is giving me a whole new schooling and learning a lot on sort of the chemistry basis of a lot of our products. So as I said earlier, we rely on this petrochemical supply chain that fundamentally begins in the Middle East, goes through Asia, refineries, and then comes to Australia. And there is a product called resin that seems to be the basis of 90% of our Australian economy. So resin goes into packaging, into PVCs, into all sorts of plastics. Now you might think, well, we want less plastic in our life. Surely this wouldn't be a problem. But if you think about our food situation, we can feed ourselves many times over as a country, but you can't process that food without PPE. So think of all chicken, you need gloves. You can't package it without, milk bottles, meat trays, all sorts of plastics that protect our food. There's a great another podcast called 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy. The episode on plastics and the impact it's had on reducing food waste is really stuck with me, and I'm mindful of it now. Without plastic, we do waste a lot of food. So it actually protects the food and gets it to the market and gets it to people safely and healthfully. So we had thought, and I know a lot of companies who hold packaging would hold about 3 months stock, talking to packaging companies. So since the Member Intelligent, we've had a couple of roundtables, one on food packaging and the food processors. Seems that we keep enough resin in the country for about 2 weeks. So they are scouring the world right now, trying to find alternative supplies. Nitrile gloves. So these gloves are used in a whole range of settings, from hairdressers to facilities management to processing food to hospital settings, mechanics who don't want oil all over their hands. All sorts of people use these gloves, and the price has gone through the roof. What we're hearing from members is that they can get orders. So you talked earlier, Jeff, about force majeures. So the orders are accepted, but the price is not provided just yet. So they won't commit to a price because the price is going through the roof. We can see that all those sorts of products are starting to have an impact. We're hearing a little bit about food additives, all that kind of stuff. We talked at the last episode about construction inputs, particularly those PVC pipes, and we're concerned that construction would grind to a halt by May. We have found an alternative supply in China that seems to meet standards. So, that's going to, again, disrupt the market probably forever, not just for this moment, because it's a little bit cheaper. So we'll see what happens with that. One thing I've learned is that oil refineries also make bitumen. And because, our 2 oil refineries in the country are choosing to make oil and petrol and diesel instead of bitumen, as are other refineries around the world, we're looking at an impending shortage of bitumen. And you might think, well, other than if you're in Victoria and dealing with potholes everywhere, you might think, how often do we need bitumen? But actually, you do need it for road maintenance, but particularly after natural disasters. So Queensland and Northern Australia are dealing with cyclone season at the moment. So after a cyclone, obviously you need to replace all those roads, for people to get about, but also goods to reach remote communities. That can't happen when we're having this reduction on bitumen and other road maintenance things. So there's a whole range of issues. And as we talk to members, we've received around over 200 inputs at the moment. That all feeds into what we talk to government about. We're working with supermarkets. We're working with the National Emergency Mechanism, just to try to, as you said, Jeff, these waves of discovery. What's the next wave that's coming? And how can we get in front of it? But I've talked a bit just then about what the government's doing, and we're talking to the government a lot. Jeff, you're attending the Office of Supply Chain Resilience meetings and Treasury meetings. What is the government doing to address this issue?
I'll keep this brief because we could talk for an hour about everything, Louise, if we give the laundry list, because there's a lot of, one of the other things we've had in this wave of discovery is a lot of new policy frameworks establishment kind of getting ready for some of these things to hit. The easiest way to summarise government response at the moment is probably focused on there's a set of things for fuel, because that market has a particular characteristic, and a set of things for the other industrial products Louise has just talked about, which has its own set of characteristics, its own needed solutions. So on fuel, there's now a National Fuel Security Task Force and Coordinator that's been very focused on addressing some of those regional distribution issues. We have a National Fuel Security Plan, which has 4 stages on it. We're presently at stage 2, which is get ready, but it also counterments the situations if there are shortages. There's a stage 3 with kind of some partial demand management, and then a stage 4, which would be serious shortages if we got to it. There's also been some things around fuel to try and increase supply. So one of the primary ones is that the government is supporting our fuel importers to locate cargoes of fuel on the spot market globally, and they might be from suppliers that we haven't used in the past, and they're underwriting those cargoes so that the importers can confidently go out, buy fuel, bring it to Australia, and that will make those shortages less impactful. And finally, we've also had something which everyone who drives a car should have experienced, a cut to the fuel excise in Australia. It's been halved for 3 months temporarily. That takes about 26.3 cents a litre off for petrol and diesel. That's a 3-month measure, but that was designed to hold until the budget. So we'll have a federal budget on the 12th of May, and it looks pretty likely that might get extended into the next financial year. That takes a bit of price pressure off. Then on the other hand, we've got the stuff for the other industrial products. So a lot of engagement with industry run through the Office of Supply Chain Resilience in the Department of Industry. As always mentioned, we've been very closely engaged with that, getting businesses to talk about some of those products, bitumen, nitrile gloves, these kinds of things, understanding, I guess, 2 things: where do they come from, what would happen if they go short, and is there anything we can do to address those problems? And most recently, something that's been called an economic resilience program. It's a $1 billion fund established within the National Reconstruction Fund. And in a way, it might function a little bit like drought relief does for farmers during a drought for industries that are going to be affected by this. So it's aiming to offer some interest-free loans to support cash flow in businesses that might have to somewhat or dramatically curtail their operations if we get major shortages of a particular product like bitumen over the next coming months. Government's working on the details for that one, and that's probably going to be up and running in the next couple of months. So what we've seen is some action that takes the price thing out, but a lot of policy vehicles being set up to make sure we've got the right, government has the right tools to increase and step up its response depending on how some of those shortages play out as they pass through over the next couple of months. I mean, I just probably observe, Louise, we've really had a great working relationship with government across many of these things. And I think as a country, we learnt a lot of lessons of COVID. Louise, you might have some COVID war stories as well. But, you know, we sometimes go to these meetings, don't we, Louise? And it's like, oh, I haven't seen you since COVID, kind of to some of these people. We've got look, Australia has the muscle memory to, it was a horrible experience, COVID, but we got the muscle memory to deal with this. Oh no, we're out of gloves. We were out of gloves in COVID. If we're out of gloves again, we kind of know how to do it this time, which is a good thing. I guess that gets to the next one is if you're out of gloves always and you're a business, like what are we seeing? Through that process with government, we're talking a lot between business and government about what government can do and what business can do to get themselves ready, because it's not simply a case of let government fix this for us, and businesses are doing a lot. So, Louise, how are business taking this on?
So I think we've moved beyond the sort of watch and wait, and they are certainly communicating, as we said, you know, best practice, communicating with suppliers, communicating with customers. It's relationships that will get everyone through this. You know, not necessarily just worrying about the movement of goods. There are, of course, some behavioural signals like stockpiling, shortened quote periods. As I said, people are willing to take the order but not actually commit to the price, tighter payment terms. You know, these are all sorts of things. There's people are also, I think, hopefully from COVID, you know, as you remember, Jeff, during COVID, everyone was very conscious of, you know, the fragility of supply chains and trying to make more robust ones. And then during the inflation shock that post-COVID, all those rules went out the window when people were just trying to just remain competitive. And so then they went down to the cheapest again. So they're trying to remember, you know, who were the good suppliers, who were the ones we had the good relationship with, who, you know, shared values, etc. The other thing that people are thinking, and I think really want to sort of disabuse people from this notion, is thinking, well, if there is fuel rationing. During COVID, I was considered an essential business, and so all my workers got to come to work. So I will surely be considered an essential worker or an essential business if there's fuel rationing. During COVID, when we were thinking about workers' permits and getting people moving through the economy, there was no limit to the number of permits that could be issued because they were imaginary anyway. So we gave permits left, right and centre. If there is fuel rationing, there will be a physical limit to what can be shared. And so even if companies are considered an essential business, you know, food, waste, packaging, etc., they're still not going to get 100% of the fuel that they would normally expect. And more importantly, it doesn't necessarily mean that their individual workers will be able to fill their private car with fuel. As you said, Jeff, you know, in the old days with the odds and evens, etc. So I really need companies to think, what would happen? How would I run my business with 30% less fuel? And you might think, well, I couldn't. Well, you probably could. You might have to. So think about things like maintenance, you know, some nice to haves that you just have to pause. Of what, you know, as I say, is this a kink in the hose or is this a plumbing problem? So we don't know how long the problem will be. But what can you do? And we're trying to work out a right mechanism to help companies think through all these issues. A lot of companies are already thinking around how they get their staff to work because staff are objecting to the fuel prices. They don't want to fill their car to come to the office or to the factory. So some, and it depends on their industry, it depends on their award and EBA, et cetera, but some are doing compressed 4-day weeks. So still the 38.5 hours, whatever it is, compressed over 4 days instead of 5 days. Some are handing out fuel vouchers. Some are, if they've got diesel or fuel on stock, that they're selling it at wholesale prices. Some are proving the handing out sort of extra, as I said, fuel vouchers, but also sort of bonus payments spread over the time. Very clearly defined. You know, this is not a forever scenario. This is just for this crisis. It's always hard to extract these things once you start them. But companies, I'm really impressed with the way companies are thinking quite imaginatively on the problem. Some are thinking about regional companies who are sort of meat processors looking to put on buses, get their workers in. Some are using AI to encourage carpooling. We had one member who wanted to buy everyone e-bikes. I'm an e-bike rider, so but their insurance, because then who's liable? So then that's sort of trapping things. So there's all these sorts of things that I think companies are trying to think strategically, trying to think imaginatively, but more importantly, working with their employees on the unique circumstances that is their workplace and the unique circumstances of their product, their industry. And, that's really what we want to see. We don't want blanket rules that affect everyone the same way because everyone's different. What do you think, Jeff? Is there anything that you think that members should be doing that isn't on the radar yet?
Probably. I mean, you covered a lot there, Louise. I think another element will be don't forget the long term. And we see this in crisis. Everyone does it in their own personal life. If something's on fire, you're very focused on the short-term fire. And we wouldn't want to detract from that. But this too shall pass one day. And there's going to be a lot of places, I mean, Louise talked about that with some of the work practices, where we need to put things in that are going to be temporary, that we're going to be able to back out. So we'd probably be looking, businesses finding ways that you can put things in that will change your business in a not irrevocable way. So when we get to here, you can change measures. That rule would apply to what your production schedules are, how you're going to price to customers. Don't necessarily put your prices up 40% forever. And the way that some have been using fuel levies, for example, that is on top of your pricing, and while the price is high, we have this on. That means that can come back off as well. That's going to give businesses the flexibility to come out of this as things run down, because again, it won't snap back. It won't be like one day this is all over. It will be a process of, I hate to be catastrophizing, but probably another year now, where even if we get to the peak, it's going to very slowly correct, and you're going to need to adjust up as it gets worse and adjust down as it gets better. So do things in a way as scalable and adjustable, and think about relationships as well with all of these. Like, I'm sure a lot of businesses are in lots of different markets, and if they're confronting a situation where they can't get gloves or bitumen or fuel or workers or whatever, maybe we should just exit market X or Y and focus on where our core revenue or margin is. At the end of that time, you don't want to walk away from a market and not be able to get back into it in 12 months' time. So think about how you can manage a balance, like you can ration across a balance of all different things. So in a year's time, your business is in a position to snap back and jump back out of this in a way. It's not like pull down the covers, but you can put them back up again. Look, that's going to look different for every business. So I know that's really hard, but there is we do want to think about where Australian industry is in 5 years' time, not just 5 months' time.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about relationships, and of course, as you said, we keep thinking about the relationships with suppliers and customers. The other key relationship is with us, with Australian Industry Group, and also with government. And this is why member intelligence matters so much. Our advice to government is being shaped every week by member intelligence, what businesses report on what the effects of the fuel allocation, freight problems, contingency planning, what they need from government. Is it possible for government to step in and help? Because they're desperate to, if you give them an idea. But it's really important that members keep feeding real-time impacts to us. And we've got the fuel supply and supply chain watch. It's easy to find on our website, australianindustrygroup.com.au. It's on the front page. Click through. All the intelligence that we're receiving, we're putting in there. There's a survey link for you to tell us what's going on. We were doing just emails, but we've formalised it now because we realised this is not a once-off. All that intelligence absolutely helps us, and it helps us to inform what the government is doing. We expect, as you said, Jeff, there's some funding going to be announced probably Monday from the government to just help transport companies, to help manufacturers just with this cash flow challenge. There'll be interest-free loans of some description. So all that kind of stuff is really important, and that has come from the contributions from members. From that data, we're also then holding industry roundtables. So we've held, as I said, food processing, packaging. We've had one on construction, got one coming up on food, road maintenance and the bitumen issue. So all this really helps to inform government. And, when we ask members, what do you want? They just said, we just want to know what's going on. We want that intelligence. We want that sort of collaboration. This is how we get it. And this is how you can help us to get that. So Fuel Watch, as I said, on the website, email us on industry.policy@australianindustrygroup.com.au. And we really, I can't stress one more time, we really value that input from members, because that's what informs a lot of what we can tell everyone else, and also what we can tell government and how we can support government. All right. Well, thanks, Jeff. I think we'll finish up there. If you found this through our website or through someone sharing it with you, you can subscribe DBrief on all the usual podcast platforms that you can find. There's also on our website, and as I said, find us on LinkedIn or find us through email industry.policy@australianindustrygroup.com.au, and we'll speak again in a couple of weeks.